All right, welcome everybody. So here we have today's meeting. We're going to be going over custom reports. I'll start off with some basics, how to kind of navigate to the different reports, how to kind of start a custom report, go over the basics of it, but then I'll dive into some more advanced stuff as well. But just to do some house cleaning stuff before we get going, I will have the chat panel open. I know there's a Q&A panel as well. I don't like to use that. I prefer to use the chat panel. So if you do have the chat open on the side and you want to ask a question, feel free to throw that in there, and either someone else can answer you or I'll answer you as I look at the questions as they come in. All right, awesome. So custom reports, getting off the bat here. So what is a custom report in Workamajig? Well, a custom report could be a variety of things. The term custom report specifically does refer to this kind of custom report section I happen to have open right now. But technically, a lot of the standard reports, the report views, I'll go through all this in a moment here, but all of those reports, a lot of them have the ability to be customized. So really, custom reports can kind of adapt to a lot of different areas of the system. So where are the different reports? Let's start there. Well, I'm in the report center. So you may be wondering, well, how did you get there? So in the upper left of your toolbar within Workamajig, you'll have your main menu. I happen to have it called Rodamajig, but by default, it would say Workamajig. So I click on the main menu up there in the upper left corner. You go to the Everyone menu, and then within Everyone, there is Report Center. Now, if you don't have access to this, there are security rights behind some of this stuff, but most everybody would see the Report Center. I click it, opens up the Report Center, and it starts you off in the standard reports. Now, those are the reports that come with Workamajig out of the box that most agencies would typically use. You know, you got your AP aging report, your AR aging, balance sheet, a lot of financial reports. You do have your project reports, such as project budget analysis. That's definitely a great one. It can be customized. There's a lot that can be done there. But when we start talking about, okay, I've used those reports, they're great, but I want to focus on a specific area that report has. So I don't need to have all the detail that project budget analysis has, for example. I just want to look at, hours by person, for example. We do have the employee actual hours report, which is definitely very good, but maybe you want to see it in a different way. You want to see everyone together, or you want to see it grouped in rows or subtotaled or different things. And then that's when we start getting into the world of custom reports. So below the standard reports is our custom report section. Now, I happen to have a couple of custom group names here. So I'll show you where that resides as well if you want to set those up. But I'm going to show you what's in my demo stuff grouping. And so here are some custom reports that I've pre-built that reside in here. Now, before I start opening up these reports and kind of going through the magic behind the scenes, there is another set of reports as well than just the report center. And that is our views. So if you click onto your global search or your spyglass icon in the toolbar, that brings up the global search, sure. But within your global search is another tab called views. And these views are actually reports. So everything that you can do in the views, you can actually create a custom report of it. However, the difference is in the views, these are actually records. So you can click on a row to open up the record. So these do have an advantage over the custom report section here. So even though you can replicate the report, the problem is that it's just a report. Where if you create a report on the views side, for example, like you can go to your timesheets. We have some pre-made timesheet views. You can make your own. And so, for example, you might have one called like My Timesheets. So if you go to My Timesheets and you just do a search, it'll show you all of your timesheets. So like this report knows who you're logged in as. I'm logged in as username. So there's all of my timesheets for username for me. Now, of course, like I said, this is not only is it a report, but you can click on these rows and it opens up the actual record. So like I said, that's the advantage of using the views over your reports or custom reports. So again, you can make the same report on both sides, but that's the advantage is, do you want to be able to click on it to open up a project, for example? Like I'm going to look for all my projects, run a report, click on them to open them up, but all of the views are clickable to open up those types of records. So I can do a lot of the same stuff. Again, in custom reports, it's views. Now, where the views kind of tails off a little bit is views can only look at the record level, meaning, okay, there is no view for every single little time entry, or all the little nuances of invoice line detail. So I can definitely go down and say, well, let me look at the billing, client invoices, let me run a report for my invoices, and I'll see some information, but this invoice might be made up of like 5 lines. Okay, well, I have to open up the record to find out what lines are on there. Like this one has 2 lines, for example. So this report is limited to the total, the header level data of that record. So if I want a report that shows, each individual line of each invoice, well, then that is a custom report. So there is no way to replicate that at this level because, again, this is looking at the record level. Hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully that gives you some ideas of maybe where to go to either create your report or look for information. Okay, so moving on. So now we know where different reports reside. Going back into our report center here. So the reason we're probably all here is to learn about the custom reports, how you can kind of manipulate them, do different things. So here in my demo stuff folder, I have a series of custom reports I've already made. Oh yeah, sorry, before I jump into that, how did I create these different report groups? So that resides, by the way, in your system setup. So if you have access to Admin Manager and System Setup, and I'm going to do a little trick in case you don't know. I'm going to hold the Control key on my keyboard. I'm going to click on System Setup, and it actually opens it up into a new browser tab. I know that's, maybe a lot of you know that, maybe some of you don't. I think it's just a good trick to have, so that way you don't lose your place on the page you were just on. Okay, moving on here. So we have in our global lists, we have, scroll down a little bit, you can see there's report groups. And so here you can add report groups or rename the ones that are already there. But just know that these report groups do not appear until you have a report in it. So I have extra report groups here that are not visible currently because there's no reports within that group. Okay, so just knowing that in System Setup, Global List report groups is where you can kind of create these groups. But let's go back to the report center itself. So in the report center now, we have my custom reports. So how did I attach these custom reports to this report group? So once we have that group created, I go into the report itself. We go into edit these reports. Under the settings tab is where you're going to find display in group. So I can choose which report group I want to show this in. I can actually combine and put my custom reports within my standard report groups. But if I have additional groups, I can choose which group I want to have that within. By default, everyone has an other group, quote unquote. And so when you put reports, when you just create a custom report fresh and you save it, it automatically goes to this other group. That's just the default. But here in the settings, you can change which report group it appears in. Let's see, a couple questions I see here about the report groups. So can I do that again? So real quick, report groups back in System Setup, under Global Lists, under Report Groups, that's where you'll find the report groups here. You may see a couple already kind of pre-built, but you can just click Insert Row and add a new one. As soon as you click out, it auto saves, and now there's a report group that you can choose from in your custom report. Do you need admin access to report to a group? So you need admin access if you want to create a report group. However, being able to put it into a group just means I need to have the rights to edit custom reports. I think it's called edit custom listings. It actually is what the right's called. Can you save it to multiple groups? No, you can only create it. You can only assign it to one group. Now, you could most certainly copy the report. So for example, let me open the report back up. When you get into the edit menu of the report, under more is copy this view. So I could create an exact copy of this report and then have it show up in a different group. Now, I think there was another question here, something about, yeah, so if you're trying to share a report group. So groups are just, they're just labels. Again, the group only appears if there is a report within it that you have access to. So you don't need to create different groups for different people. You could just have one group, one report group, but only the reports that they have access to will they see them. So it doesn't matter if they can see this group, it matters which reports they can see that, each individual one. So again, let me go back into this report, go back into the edit menu. We might be getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but this is good questions. So in the settings tab of our custom report, we can see that, okay, this one's set to private. This means I've created this report for myself, and I haven't given access to anyone else. So if you create a custom report, it defaults to private, and you're the only one that can see it. As soon as you uncheck that, that's when the visible to will appear. So you can say, well, I want this report visible to, let's say, creatives and traffic. So you can choose which groups to assign them to. Now, you can't assign them to a person, unfortunately, but you can assign them to these groups. And then you can always click on the group here to see, well, who's in that group. Oh, okay, that's who's in that group. That's who's in that group. So that's who can see and access this report. Now, in this case, I'll just click the plus sign and add everybody. So everybody should be able to access this report, for example. Okay, then you want to apply that change. So this is basically the first step of saving any report changes is the apply button here in the edit menu. And then if you notice now, there's a new button here in the report that says memorize. That's basically saying, okay, well, based on the changes I made, make sure that you run your report, make sure it looks the way you want. Okay, good. I'm going to make sure and save my changes now. Because if I didn't click save or memorize, and I close this report and reopen it, the changes I made are now gone. So memorize is basically the save button. Oh, got a couple more questions here. Can you group views? Well, you can definitely put, views, I'm sorry. So views, no, unfortunately, this is locked in terms of how these are grouped. We have the views broken out by role. Now, what's interesting is this view section, you will actually see on every Today page as well, and then it's trimmed down to just what that kind of role can see. So for example, if I open up, let's say, let's go to Today Purchasing as an example. So if I go to my Today Purchasing page, and I scroll down to the views section here on the left, you can see, well, here are views that are specific to the role of a purchasing person. Even though I have access from the global search views to all of the views in the system. So you're going to see, that if you're, on that roles page of Today, you'll be able to see the things that are more specific to that function. But because I'm on Today Purchasing, I don't have, client invoices or projects here. So instead of having to navigate to Today Project Manager or Today Billing, that's where you can open up the views and look under Billing for client invoices, or scroll through and look for projects and access those reports that way. So there's always going to be different ways to kind of navigate. I like to just show kind of the overall views that you'll have access to and the report center. That tends to be kind of the core functionality if you're doing, report stuff, if you will. All right. Oh, I do apologize if I'm going too fast. I'll try to slow it down a little bit there. Let's see. When you copy the report, you can I don't understand the problem with version control if you edit it later because you have to edit all the versions. Well, sure. So I was going to save this for later, but you do have the ability to export and import your custom reports as well. So if you're trying to do some kind of version control, you could always export the report in case you lose something. But it sounds like you're saying if you have the same report in multiple groups, correct, they are now independent reports, so you would have to update them. So that's why I would suggest having one report group for that type of report. I don't recommend having to duplicate the same report over and over. So a good example of that would be back here in these this one that we call the My Timesheets. So the reason why I'm going here is because it's already built in. So for example, if I go to the views, timesheets, My Timesheets, this report view is already going to pull only My Timesheets. So notice that my name is the only name listed here. That is because when I go to modify this report, and I now go to its filters, so let's talk about the filters, this filter says when the name is me. Now I could say, the name is something else, it's equal to something else, or, any of these people, but this report is set up specifically to only show me timesheets that are assigned to me. Now, there's a prompt for the approval status. So if I go to the report filters that you would fill in, notice I don't see the, name is me, because that's a hard-coded filter. There's no prompt for it. It's part of the report. But I can go through my timesheets and say, oh, let me look at all the ones that got rejected, or all the ones that are, sent for approval. So you have the ability to kind of flip through status, but still this report is set up to only show me my timesheets. Let's see, next question. I know that you can see when a report was last accessed, but can you see a log of who pulled the report and when? No, unfortunately. I mean, it'll just say, who last ran it, but we don't keep a log of that information. I'm not sure what the need is there. So if you have something, if you do have questions like that of certain security or specific needs, feel free to always send an email to support@workamajig.com, and that'll go to your account manager, and they can kind of help address any concerns or needs that you have there. All right. Well, let's talk about some of these more custom reports. So at this point, I'm sure a lot of you have built a custom report, at least the basics. So going through that process, just so you know, we do have a help guide on this. So I have the first stage of this guide open, called our Custom Reports Overview. So if you're really looking to see, hey, I'm gonna get some step-by-step instructions, after this webinar, hey, how do I do this and this and this? Well, this guide is gonna kind of walk you through that. We have our overview that just gives you kind of the overview I've given you now. It talks about kind of the custom reports, the data sets that we're gonna pull from in a moment here, and some advanced features. But it does have a new custom report guide. I open that up, and this will take you through it step by step of how to create a new custom report. And this it will help you create a specific report to time detail. So how do you create a report of time per user, per day or hour, whatever you need? This will kind of walk you through just the basics. But then of course, we have an advanced guide that I'm going to kind of talk through a little bit. We have a pivot table feature I'll talk about. And last, we'll end up with this importing custom reports. Okay, so let's go through and just talk about some of the basics if you're making a new report. So we know kind of how to navigate. We know some of the inner workings already, but let's go ahead and create a new custom report. So I hit the plus sign for new custom report. Now do know that there are security rights of who can create a custom report. And then there's also a layer of security of who has access to which data sets. So when you start getting into these custom reports, the reason why there are so many security rights behind custom reports is because there is no security in what the report shows. So there may be some information that maybe doesn't need to be shared with everyone in the company. So you either need to create a custom report that only shows certain information and nobody has the right to edit the report, or maybe you create the report for yourself and you print it out and give it to other people. So just keep that in mind. There are additional security reasons and process behind these custom reports. So these data sets here are going to always have extra detail. Like I was saying earlier, when you want to run a report of client invoices, okay, the views is great for that because you can click on it, open up the invoice and see the information. But if you'd rather have a report that shows not only the client invoice detail, but also the line detail of client invoices. Well, that's what we have. I'm going to type ahead here. We have our billing data. So the description here says this data set gives you access to client invoices. But the next sentence says there is one line item per invoice line item. So it's going to show you the line item detail is what this report will show you. So if you're trying to say, well, I want to see how many lines were billed to this item versus that item, because there's so much separate detail within each invoice that we bill everything on one invoice, but the line detail separates it. Well, this report can split out that detail for you. Now, billing is a whole nother discussion because depending if you're doing fixed fee billing line data or you're billing time and materials line data, there are different custom reports based on what level of detail of data you are looking for. So I'm not going to go into that level of detail today. I simply like to use the time detailed data custom report. So as a great example, we have time detailed data. You notice there's another one called time detailed data no costs. The reason why we have that, again, talking about this security. So a lot of times, you know, we don't necessarily need to share the hourly cost of time entries with everybody. So if we're going to create a report that everyone has access to, then we might utilize this report so they can run the report without worrying about, you know, them modifying the report to see the hourly cost. So, but the time detailed data, this one gives you all data relating to every single time entry. So that's where these data points are kind of pointing towards, is it's not just going to tell me how many hours were spent on a project. Yes, this report could tell me that, but this report is going to report out one row per time entry. The last one we do have is a time detailed data with employee custom fields. So if you set up custom fields on your employees and you want to utilize that for some reason, you know, again, we have another report for that. So we always create new data sets every now and then. We add fields to these reports every now and then. Sometimes we just have to find out what people are looking for. If there's a certain data connection of, hey, you know, with this time entry, you know, that time is for a project. Well, on that project, there's this. Okay, well, we can sometimes, you know, add additional fields to pull that relational data together. But we always have to find that first data point. And so a lot of times this time detailed data is a great starting point for that. I'm going to go and click on time detailed data now, and this will start a brand new custom report. So when you create a brand new custom report, you know, everything's kind of blank. So the first tab you're taken to is the layout tab. We have groups and we have columns. Groups is saying, well, I want to group all of this time entry data. Let's group it by project. So I'll put project. Now, as soon as you start typing ahead, anything with the word project will show up here. So I'm going to say, well, I want project name. Let's do project name. That'll be our grouping. And then, of course, one column. First column, we might want to have the username. What's the name of the user that entered their time? Next to that, we want actual hours worked. Now, do we want to know the date, or, you know, however level of detail you want? This is where you start putting in that detail. But you can simply drop down the columns to see all of the available fields that are in this report, and you can see there's a ton. Well, I got a lot of custom fields too. But in this case, I just want to see how many hours each user spent on a project. Now, do I want to see the total hours worked or each individual time entry? Right now, this will show me each individual time entry. But what I can do is I can click group rows together. Now, what's interesting about this option only appears in custom reports. So again, if you're in like the views and you're looking at project or invoice, you know, records, well, you can't group those together because it's already set to one line per record. Here, I can say, okay, even though this report is pulling one row per time entry, I can say, let's group that together. So if you notice, the grouping options appeared, and we're going to group by person, but we're going to sum all of the hours together as one total. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, again, I'm just doing this real quick because of the demonstration. But when I saved my changes, now the report creates, we can see it says time detailed data. I didn't change the name of it yet. I don't have any filters yet. So I'm just going to go and click search. Now, again, this is my test site. I don't have as much data as some of y'all may have, but here I can see, oh, hey, on this project, this user put 48 hours on there. Let me scroll down. Okay, on this project, this user put 136 hours. This person put 40 hours. So we can just simply get a quick sum total by person and then have a grouping by project. All right. Now, to get into some of the more detailed options, let's go back into the edit menu of this report now that it's been saved. So depending on what we want to see, we have grouping options, we have columns, and we also have the ability to create what we call calculations. Now, I don't have a great example of a calculation for this demonstration here. I'll show you some calculations I have made on other custom reports. But there's always ways to do specific calculations that maybe go beyond what we're seeing as the available columns. So, because I already know in this report we have, like remaining hours or allocated hours. We already have other fields available that may fulfill what you're looking for without having to create a calculation. The calculation is really if you're needing to go above and beyond what the report already has available. Okay, so having said that, let's move on to another section of the report. So that's the layout, how the report looks. If we go to the Filters tab, we were here sporadically already, but at this point, what we have is the ability to filter information. Now, a filter can be something that automatically happens when you run the report, or is a prompt that you can run a filter on top of what is being reported. So I know we have kind of these two sections of before and after. Typically, you're just doing a filter before. So before we present the data, I want to filter the data down. So I'm going to say, let's add a new filter. All those same fields are available here in the filters that we could add into the report. So for example, well, let's say I want to filter for the person who entered time. Well, that was username. Now I could say the username is equal to this specific person. So this one already knows that, hey, here's all the active users in the system that I can already have it being linked to. But maybe I want this to be something that I'll change on the fly. So the default condition when you create a filter is equal to. I'm going to drop that down, and I'm going to say it could be, which one is it? Any of. And then notice that in this drop-down prompt, I can now pick multiple people. So you can add a filter, just a single filter that filters down multiple people. So that helps to save from having to add this filter of username equal to this one person, and then adding two more in the same fashion. You can just have one filter that handles what could have been done as three. Now, additionally, like we showed in the timesheet view, I can say only show time, that I've entered that is related to me, is me. So notice that the whole selection goes away because that is the selection. This filter knows that, hey, look for only time that is me. I'm logged in as username. So it's able to just filter it down simply by that. But let's say I do want to be able to pick and choose every time I run the report. So let me put it back to equal to. And instead of populating the value, I'm going to click prompt for value. So when I click prompt, now that is going to show up as a filter that I can set every time I run the report. Case in point, let me apply that change. Now, if I click on the three lines, or I like to call it the hamburger, that brings up your search options. And now there's username equal to, and there's all the people I can filter it down to. So if I want to filter it down, to one single user on this report, that works perfect. I could use that any of, I see a question there regarding any of. So I could have made this any of, and I could pick and choose multiple people at this time as well. So it just comes down to, do you want to pick a specific person, multiple people? How do you want to filter it down? Maybe by department even, or office. There's other settings that are in the employee record that you can filter by. So, and of course, I made this change, and if I like it, I want to click Memorize. Click Memorize while it's saving the view. Give it a moment here. Let's see, a couple questions came in about those filters. Let's see. If you have any of, does it allow you to choose several on the search filter? Yes. So that's what exactly what I was kind of describing. And just to show you that as well, I'll re-edit this. I'll go to my filters. I'll change it from equal to any of. It's still set to prompt. So when I apply that change and go to my filters, when I drop down the any of, it lets me select multiple. So I can have a multi-select simply by just adding that as a filter option. All right, good question there. Let me blank those out. Next question, how do you build a report with the fields from multiple data sets? Great question. So you can't. We do have an API, meaning if you have kind of like a web guru on your end, you are able to pull these custom reports together in one report on your end. So this may be a little ahead of the game here, but notice under the settings tab, there is an API key for this specific report. So if you're trying to pull data together that is not relational per se, but you find some way to relate them, or you have something to connect them on your side, yes, you could connect via our API, pull this report via the API access key, and do that for, like, let's say 3 reports. You can pull the API access key for 3 reports, downstream it to your end, and then compile it together however you want on your side. So I have several clients that do that. They love that feature because it gives them control. Now, a quick lesson on the API side, all you need to do is make sure that you have all the fields you want here as columns. So that's a quick little lesson of API. Second set of that, I have a project that requires such report, but none of the existing data sets can accommodate fully. Yeah, so I think that was Kate that asked that. So Kate, I would say, I mean, I don't know if you've already reached out to support@workamajig.com, but I would definitely suggest that, True, you might need to run multiple reports depending on what kind of data you're trying to grab together. But an API is definitely, kind of a way to get the data together on your side if you have those needs. So, Kate, I apologize if you say no one could help. Like I said, send an email to that address. You can say it's for Rod. They'll pass it to me, and I'll kind of review what you're looking for on the report side. So I don't mind trying to help you out there. Let's see. We move on to our next set of questions here. Looks like, I think we went through a lot of questions here so far, sorry. So I think Jessica said, I have found that the any of option does not always become a drop down for selecting options, even when there are too many options to choose from. So yeah, so Jessica, I'm sorry if you're not seeing something work correctly with the any of filter. That would be something that we'd have to send over our engineers to investigate. It could be maybe an issue with the browser you're using. I know a lot of the browsers are updating right now with the new year. So that could possibly be it, but yeah, definitely send us an email, screenshot of what you're trying to do, kind of try to visualize what's not showing, tell us how to reproduce it. We'll definitely, follow up on our end, and if we need to, we'll pass it to our engineers to investigate further. So, let's see, Rebecca, yeah, you can't do multiple data sets. Yep, sorry about that. But if it's relational, so just so you know, if it is truly relational, like I said, this is a time detailed data view. We're looking at individual time entries. Well, that time entry is for a project. So we're able to link the project name. We have the project number. We have a lot of project fields available in this report, even though it's looking at time entry. But again, that's because time is put to a project and task. If this project happens to be part of a campaign, I could group it by campaign, which is above the project. So as long as it's relational, it can always be a field that's available in this report. And like I said, we add fields all the time. So if you find a field that is relational to time entries in some way, we could definitely look into adding that as a field available in this report. So if you're trying to, I see this a lot, you're trying to create one report that has everything. Well, there are some restrictions, especially when it comes to you're trying to do these calculations, and I'll get to that in a moment. But we always take advice, we always take a feedback, better yet, of what you're trying to accomplish, and we'll see what we can do. Let's see, it looks like Christopher says, can you create a report with multiple views, for example, a report that will show billing and purchasing data? So how is that relational? That's the question. We could do a report that is project level, and it tells you, how much has been billed on the project and how much expense gross is on the project. So that sounds like the project budget analysis. And that would be a better report to utilize if you're trying to get multiple information from a single project. Now, I know it may not show everything at once on that report, but that one does let you drill into it. So you can click on the billed gross and click on that value, and it will pop up a new screen of all the invoices. You can click on the expense gross. It'll show you all the vendor invoices, all the POs. So depending what you're looking for, sometimes it's just a discussion to say, hey, where do I go to find this information, together. So, okay, good question, Christopher, though. Lynn, can you scroll down on your screen? Your screen is getting cut off. No, I can't, unfortunately. I'm not sure what is being cut off. I think, I can see my mouse all the way down here. So apologize if the video is not as good. Maybe you can watch the recording later. Then that way you'll be able to see it full screen. Is there a training on API? So we don't typically do a training. You have a web developer on your end that typically understands API already. And we do have help guides that are very detailed to API specifically that we would show them. And typically they would know what to do from there. But we can always you can always set up a discussion with your account manager to discuss API needs. But again, it does require you have somebody on your end that knows API tools. Let's see. Is there a, Joel says, is there a BI, you probably mean API. Is there an API tool that works well with Workamajig? Again, we have lots of API availability, but I would say reach out to your account manager if you have questions on that. You can most certainly search our help guide for API. We have a very extensive guide that kind of gives you some of the basic information they would need, and that might help you out from there. Okay, so moving on a little bit here, we'll talk about, we got the layout, we've gone through the filters a bit. Again, if we want to do more filters, what would typically be a filter in this type of report for time detail? Sure, we can narrow it down to a person. I'm going to add another filter, and I'm going to say date worked. And with date worked, I can say, well, do I want to choose what day of that time, or do I want to choose a range of time? So when I use the date worked field or any date field, I typically would put the condition to be between. Notice now there's two values, but I'm going to do a prompt that hides the two values because that's going to now be part of my filters in the report. So this is always a great way to kind of start, a time analysis. You're saying, well, I want to see all the time that was done, last week. So do Saturday through Sunday, click search. I probably won't have much data because it's my test site, but here are the time that was put in last week. So it's all just these filters that kind of take the data that this report has access to and just narrows it down. So again, that's really the difference between the layout is what you see. The filters is filtering down the results before we display them in the layout. Now, like I said, there's this after feature. It doesn't get used very much. And I can't remember how to explain it off the top of my head. But a lot of times it's saying, okay, well, if the in the layout, if it comes back with a 0, then do this. So there's kind of like an if then from a filtering perspective. But I'm going to talk about kind of the if then kind of process in a moment here as well in the layout. Moving through the rest of the features here, the settings tab, I can rename the report. So I can just call this the time report. Now, no matter what you call the report, you'll always be able to see down here in the settings, what data set is this report using? So sometimes, you may start giving these reports really fancy names, but you might need to go, hey, let me go back. What data set are we pointing to? Oh, this is time detailed data. Okay. So that's why it's showing the information it's showing, because this is time detail, not like billing detail, for example. So it always comes down to what you're looking for. The data set is kind of the focal point. You do have other options of, how do I want to align things? Do I want to put a description in here? How do I want to kind of maybe print? So there's always different ways to do things. Additionally, there's that display in group. So if you created those report groups, you could say, I want that to show up in a different group. You can uncheck private, make it visible to everybody, for example. Because again, all new custom reports by default are private. Now, a neat feature I like to show is run this view when it's opened. By default, this is off for every report. But if you have a report that doesn't pull much data, or it filters down the data enough that you're not pulling in much data, well, then when you say run this view when it's opened, then whenever you open up this report, it'll just automatically run. You don't have to click search. So if you get your filters, set up the way you want, Perhaps you set up the filter to say, hey, only show time that is for me within this date range. So let me do that real quick. So if I say, let me adjust these filters, the username is me, for example. The date worked, I'm going to say, last week. So we do have some last week, yesterday, today, tomorrow. There are some filters that are, or conditions that are already available in here. So you don't have to do extra coding to get it to be last week. We already have that pre-built as a condition. So by putting in the only time that's me for last week, I'm going to apply. Now notice I get the same exact data because I had filtered it down that way, but I created filters that are part of the report that auto run. So I don't need to filter that down every time. Every time I run this report, it's always going to show my time from last week. So kind of a neat way to automate a report if this is what you're looking for. Now, what's also neat is you get reports set up like this, but we do have another feature under more called schedule reports. So if you create a report and you think it's great, and you want to kind of automate some of these processes, note, first of all, that the URL of this report is unique. So I could actually bookmark this URL to my browser, and I could access and run the report just by simply having a bookmark in my browser. That way you don't have to keep navigating the report center, go to the time analysis, click on the report, click search, or auto run it. You could just set up the report to be, this is how I want to run every week. Every week it's going to change the values because of how I set up the filters. And then I'm going to now schedule it. Now what a scheduled report means is I want to have this report be emailed to whoever is in this email to list. So I can pick and choose who to email this report to automatically. You can schedule these reports to be like a daily report, a weekly report, run for this amount of time. So there's a lot of neat things you can do here in terms of a scheduled report, but it's a way to automate your reports, have them be emailed to people. It's a way to go kind of beyond what our default notifications and options already are. So if you're looking for like a custom solution to a report you're looking for, this is a great way to go about that. Now, yes, there's a lot of moving pieces to kind of bring together to make it work. But after a client plays with this feature quite a bit, they get the hang of it and they love this. So it's a great way to kind of automate your reports and have them be emailed out. Now, because of the way I set up this report, I said, only show me time that's for me for last week. Well, let's say I didn't enter any time last week. That scheduled report would actually still run. It'll send me an email, but the email won't have a report link. It will just say, oh, there was no data to present. So just throwing that out there because I hear that a lot of different comments or things about the emailed reports. All right, let me go back into the edit menu. So the last tab after settings that we have in here is pivot. Now pivot is a way to say, okay, instead of creating these calculated columns of information, because I'll show you how to do that, but where pivot came about was, well, how can we make it easier for people to create these columns of dynamic information without them having to hard code columns in the layout? So as a better example of columns and custom columns versus pivot, I'm going to back out of this report. I'm going to go back into my demo stuff. So as a good example, I have these two reports, client billings by month, and then this one's called client billings by month with pivot in brackets. So the difference is this one utilizes the pivot table for its view. I'm going to open up the first one, client billings by month. I open up this view. Again, I don't have much data, so I'm going to run it for everything. So I have data going back to 2010 of client invoice data. So let me scroll down to the current year. Now what I've done here is, we're grouping by year, and then we have one column per client, or one row per client, better yet. But notice we have amount total, but then I have every month as its own column. So how did I get that? Well, let me go into the edit function. Here in the edit function, notice that these columns look different. They're called calculated columns. So amount total is already a standard column. So that column is already known data. What we've done in these calculated columns here is if I expand on the detail, here's this formula section. And this is when we start getting into kind of like a mathematics, if you will. But since our server database is SQL based, the language is more SQL. However, there has to be safe characters to protect our database integrity, so nobody messes with it. So you can only do certain functions of SQL functions in here. And again, excuse me, some of the functions have to be different characters to work. So having said that, here in this formula, this is a typical formula I would see when I see somebody create a calculated column. It says case when, month, and there's the posting date equals 1, which means January in SQL language. Then, display the amount total. If it's not that posting month or posting date of January, then show a 0. Now, how this is working is because, again, this custom report is looking at billing information. So it's looking at the invoice total. So it knows that, okay, this invoice had a posting date of this month. So show the total amount of that billing information. But because that row is split up by client, it's now only going to show the amount total for that client for that month. So I know this might go over some people's heads a little bit, but again, if you have kind of a database person, a web developer, they'll typically understand this language and how to apply this. Now, in this case, I had to hard code this 12 times. So you can see each one is, when the posting date is month 1, month 2, all the way to month 12. And so that's how it's going to calculate each column. And then each column has a label, January, February. I just abbreviated it. And that's what's going to show at the top of the report here. So you always have the ability to, have the columns show this information, but you can always change what the header of that column says. So in case you're wanting to print it out, or, I have some clients where they'll export this information to something else, and that other system needs this column to say this. So we can preset the header to already say what they need on the other end, for example. Or they're just wanting to, call it, March versus 3. Now, I think this is a very neat report. A lot of clients like to use this report. It has all the months. Everything's just listed there. It's pretty straightforward. But let's say, okay, well, I want to flip it. I want each month here on the left, or I want each year, and then at the top, I want a grouping by client. Well, client, I may have hundreds of clients. I don't want to have to hard code a column for every client that we have, because then, well, what if that client's no longer active? Well, now I have to go in here and modify that report and take them out, and it becomes a mess. So whatever you're trying to create as a dynamic kind of column, that's where the pivot table came about. So if I close out of this report, I'm going to open up the one right below it, client billings by month. So same philosophy, but this one's utilizing the pivot feature. I'm going to open that up. Just click search. Now, this first view is very basic. Okay, well, we see that year again, we see the client, but we're seeing invoice numbers now, and we see month. We're seeing just data. This is basically like a data stream. But it's when I go to the pivot table, now here on the right, oh, now I can see, okay, here's my clients on the left. I have, the years at the top. So that way, I don't have to hard code this for every year. It just automatically shows if there's information. So now I can expand that year, and then I see the months of that year, 10, 11, 12. So I know that's October, November, December. And I can see, okay, well, here's each client. Okay, here's how much billings we made for this client for that month of that year. And I can also expand that client. And now I can see the invoice numbers, of what was the invoice total. So this one's a lot more dynamic and gives you a lot more information without having to know how to code calculated columns. There are some limitations to this, I will say, but as long as you're just trying to group and kind of sort this information in this way, it's really quick and easy. Now let me go back and edit this one, because since this one's using the pivot function, whatever you want to use in the pivot table first has to be in the columns. So that's rule number one. Create the columns that you need. Then in the pivot table, those columns will show up here. Now you have to click which columns that you're wanting to include, and the system is pretty smart at knowing which column goes into a row versus a column versus a value. So you shouldn't have to, drag and drop them into different sections. It should already know which one it belongs in. Now, there are a filter section here. They can work, but I typically would say don't utilize the filters here. Just utilize the pivot function just to be able to add the fields. They should populate into the sections that they would make sense in. Now, of course, between rows and columns, you can kind of drag and drop them between and see which works best. But that whole center values section is all about numbers. So, whatever is a numerical field will be available as the value. Now, if you do need filters, I would recommend the filter section of the report itself, not within the pivot section, because there you can say, okay, show me this information, have that be defaulted. But again, that will drive then what is available in the pivot section and allows you to kind of create more of a dynamic report. All right, I saw a lot of questions flying while I was going through that section there. So let me try to catch up here real quick. Scroll back up. All right. Let's see. Donna said, in the recent past, I tried to create a time analysis report that would pull in time entries as well as outsourced labor data. So outsourced labor, you're saying voucher data. If you're entering time in that time, that time can be billed through a vendor invoice. That's a whole nother thing. But to get the complete picture of hours worked, total billable labor, I was told that outsourced labor, which is linked to a PO, was part of a different data set. Well, if you're trying to find time that is on a vendor invoice, then yeah, that's vendor invoice data. But if you're just looking for time overall, no, you can just use time detailed data to pull all time in the system, regardless if it was done by a contractor or not. So that should be available just in simply the time detailed data. But again, if you're trying to find something relational to it being on a vendor invoice, that I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. So hopefully I answered your question for now, but if you're looking for something specific, definitely email us on that. Let's see, Laura says, would you please remind us how to associate the custom report with a specific data set? Yeah, so once the report is created, the data set is locked for that report. So it's only when you're creating a new custom report do you get the option of all the data sets. Now, again, I'm an administrator, meaning I see everything in the system. So I see every custom report data set. Now, by default, if you're not an administrator, you will see nothing here. You may have the right to create a custom report, but you're not going to see any data sets by default. This will be blank. But this is where you associate that custom report. You have to pick a data set first, and then you're off from there. Let's see, moving on. Karen says, do you know why date worked is not available as a filter in project view? Well, what are you trying to see in project view? Because date worked is relational to time entries. There is no date worked relational to projects. There's project start date, project complete date. There's other date fields of the project, so I'm not sure if I understand what the need is there. Now we could pull like project due date into the time analysis report, the time detailed data report. Like I said, there's relational data that we can pull down into there, but you can't pull detailed time information into a top level project view. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Next question, how can you utilize the opening, closing, and the and or of the filters tab under advanced options? Good question. So let's talk about that for a moment. Trying to think of which one I have here that might show some of that. I don't think I have any reports. I can't think of any off the top of my head that have that set up. But as a quick explanation, if I go into and I create what we call a calculated filter, if I'm trying to translate something into a different language, again, this is getting more into SQL at this point, but I can, use SQL kind of coding to say, okay, if the year, is this posting date, I'm just trying to extrapolate the year. You know, there's also month, there's also day of the week. There's different, codes for this in SQL, but this filter here is just saying, okay, if the year that I input, that's prompted, for example, I put in 2020, everyone's favorite year, and this posting date, the posting date of the record may be, 12/31/2020. Well, this is just looking at the year portion of that total date. So that's how you can kind of utilize some different ways if you're trying to extrapolate information that's not already available. Like we don't have posting year, well, we can still extrapolate the year from the posting date. Hopefully that makes some sense. Like I said, when you start getting down to these kind of details, a lot of times that's something that we kind of help you with, like one-on-one, either through email or maybe a support call kind of a thing. Let's see, I'll move on. Rebecca asks, what would the formula be for a quarter? Oh, good question. So if you're trying to do a quarter and it's not already as like an available option, for example, that's where we get into things just like this, where we say, okay, I just want to filter on, actually better yet, let me back out to that first report I had here. So if I'm creating a calculated column, for example, this one's January. I could make this calculated column be, I could call it January through March. And I could say, okay, when the posting date equals 1, and I can say or 2 or 3, then the amount total, else 0 end. And that way, this captures the first 3 months of data in one column. So it just kind of comes down to knowing how to, filter it down, in the calculated filters or a calculated column in the formula section. I know that may not be as detailed answer as you're looking for because it's a little hard to explain just here on a live webinar. So moving on, if you do not have a database person on your team, can Workamajig account managers help create calculated columns or their guides to get correct symbols and language from. So yeah, I'm just going to bluntly say it, we are not your personal report makers. We are your account managers here at Workamajig. We will definitely work with you as best we can. We will train you on how to use these reports. We can do one-on-one calls to kind of train you on all these functions. Now, we can only train you so far. So if doing these formulas is too much, well, yeah, maybe then you might need to leverage somebody on your side that knows this language. But at the same time, we are more than happy to help you out, again, as best as we can. Just don't abuse us, but we are happy to help out. If you have a custom report, really what's easiest for us to assist you is that if you're just looking to get one thing done at a time. If we get an email that says, hey, I want a column that does this, a column that does that, and you throw this huge design that would take forever, well, that's not something that we assist with. But if you have a report that you're working on and there's this one filter that's not working or calculation that's not working, yeah, let us know. We'll definitely review it. We'll bounce it around a couple of people here to see what we need to help with that one calculation. And then of course, you can request more help from there. But don't throw us like a report of mass proportions. But again, having said that, I mean, we'll gladly help you out as best we can. So let's see. Amy says, can you get your report by billing pivot report? So I already went over the pivot report already, so I think we're probably good on that one. I'll move on to the next question. Can you send us that custom report? Client billing by month. Hey, all right. So here we go. So these reports that I've been showing you here, by the way, these custom reports, I haven't gone through all of them yet. I'm not sure if we have time or need to, but a lot of these custom reports that I have already built here, we actually have listed in our help guide. So for example, if you go to this custom reports overview, articles in this section, notice there's one for importing custom reports. I'm going to open up that guide right now. And we have a section of pre-made custom reports. So hooray, here's all the reports that I'm kind of showing you, and you can download these. So there's the client billings by month. There's the client billings by month pivot. So you could download these to your hard drive. Now, don't open them or edit them, for example, but just download them as is. And when you are in Workamajig, you have to be an administrator to do this, most likely. But if you go to your main menu under Admin Manager, Import Data. So if you go to the import screen, you can type in, I want to import a view. That's where you go and you select that file, display the file. It brings up kind of a preview screen, and then just import. So you can quickly import these reports here into your system. Now it's going to import it into the other, quote unquote, you don't see my fingers in quotes here, but it's going to import into the other report folder. So that's where they'll land when you first import them. But that is a great way if you just want to, again, take a look at these reports without having to recreate them yourself. A lot of times I see clients that use these reports, they'll import them because they'll use them to experiment with and learn from how to create their own reports. Let me go through. So we're kind of at our hour here, so I apologize. I'll try to stay on for these questions here. So that's where you can get your custom reports. Already asked that one. Let's see, Jessica says, in the values section of the pivot, can you customize the value like in a regular pivot in Excel? So yeah, the pivot function, I mean, it's great, but it's also limited. I hate to say that. You know, it's meant to be quick and dynamic and easy. That was the reason we kind of threw this in here, was to give people another way to get information. But you're correct, when you're in the edit function of the report and you're now in that pivot section, you know, there are some values you can do here. I can say, okay, do I want to do the sum? Do I want to do a count? Do I want min, max? So you have some different functions. You just simply click on this little caret or drop-down arrow to get those different options. Just so putting it out there, it doesn't mean every function is going to work, and it doesn't mean every function is going to work well. So, you know, in the value section, you can't put like words. Like I want to know the status of everything. Like I want a report that shows status of this, status of that, and the status happens to be a word. Well, that's not a numerical value. So you can't put, words as the values in these reports, unfortunately. So if you have other questions on the pivot, just let us know. Let me see. Another question here says, when I try to open a new custom report, yeah, okay, so pivot is not an option. But on reports I already have set up, pivot is an option. Correct. So the pivot section here actually in this section, you are correct. It does not appear until you've modified the report and saved it once. So that is a good question to ask. So if you are interested in the pivot function, create the report. When you're in the edit section, you know, add the columns you want in the report, you know, click apply, memorize. You should then see the pivot option appear here on the right. Once you see that there, okay, go back and edit. Now you can go to the pivot section, check the columns you want visible. They should just line up where they should be, apply, and search again and click pivot. You should be good from there. But you are correct. You have to kind of create the report first, save it at least once, and then that function does show up. Let's see, what is the after grouping rows together section for? After grouping rows, I'm trying to remember. Filters, get into a filter here, show advanced options. No, that's not the one I was looking for. I'm trying to remember now. Maybe it's the calculated filter is what you're kind of thinking of. So there is a way to have a filter run after. Gosh, I apologize. I'm trying to remember this function. There's a way to say, basically it says run the report first. And then, run this calculation on top of it. Oh, I'm sorry, it's actually in the columns. So apologize, bear with me. So in the calculated columns, there is this option here called calculate after main query. I think that's what you're asking for. So the reason for this is to say, okay, when I click calculate after the query, notice that my available fields change. It changes to all of the values that are currently in the report. So if you need to go beyond one layer of calculation, this is that additional layer. Now that's the last layer we currently support. So if you're trying to do a calculation on top of a calculation on top of a calculation, you're going to have to export this to Excel and do your magic there. But we do have the ability to say, okay, in this column, let's take this calculation and this calculation, let's add them together to create another sum or another total in some way. So we do have that ability to do a calculation after the initial report runs. So there are just some neat things to do there. But again, keep in mind, you can't calculate on top of that afterward. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a lot of a lot of going back and forth there. All right, can I use SQL for any of my custom built in reports? Yes. So again, it's SQL based. So when I say SQL based, it is a SQL database, but through this interface, we only let certain safe functions be usable. So for example, we have the pound sign before and after this number 1 here. That's because we're in the SQL world, it would have been a comma or a hyphen or something instead of the pound key. So again, some of the symbols or language may change just based on it being safe for Workamajig. So if you're actually a SQL person and you're trying to create SQL code, just I would say email that to us. Hey, here's the code I'm trying. How do can you help me translate this native SQL language into Workamajig's safe SQL language here? We can always help you out with that. So that's where I'm saying we're more than happy to help you out with just kind of like one-off situations. But trying to create a whole report for you from scratch, that's not typically our deal. So, all right, moving on. Next question. We still got a couple more here. I'll try to get through. Would you do a webinar on just calculated columns? That would be helpful. Sure. Yeah, we could always set something up and say, hey, let's just focus a webinar on calculations. I'll pass that information or feedback along. But again, you can always email us of what you're trying to do. So, Joel asks, is there a SQL dictionary? Well, you can Google. Google has a great search option for SQL. I know that's kind of how I do some of my stuff as well. Of these custom reports I've made, is I had to use a lot of Google searching for SQL code. And then, of course, I talk to our developers of what's the safe language of this. And again, that's how we're more than happy to kind of try to help translate things for you if that's what you're needing. Curtis, yes, this recording will be available. We have on our help guide, you can type in webinar and you'll find our previous webinars and our recordings there. Let's see. Karen asks, great training session. Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll make sure that this video gets uploaded to our webinars database. Let's see. Everyone else says thank you, thank you. Well, that's very good. So if there's no other questions today, we'll kind of wrap it up. I apologize I didn't get into some of my other reports I like to show off here, like my post-mortem kind of scheduled detailed report. It's a great report to run of a project you've completed. Now, there are some criteria on that report that I'm not going to go into here that you need to fulfill first, but it's a great way to see kind of how a project is doing. I would always run it on a project when I complete it to see, did we complete it on time? Did we stay under our budgeted hours? Different things like that. This time by week, this was another kind of a neat custom report. I always hear a lot of people wanting to see reports of time by certain things. And so this was just a very customized one. I'll just run it real quick as an example, where I can put calculations not into the columns per se, but I can actually create a calculated group. So now there's a lot of fancy code in here. I'm not going to go into that, but what this is doing is saying, hey, anything in this group, those time entries have to be for that week. So it's kind of a neat way to filter things by the group level, and then each group can just show just that week's time. So like I said, maybe that would be good, is save a training session or webinar just for columns, calculated columns. More than happy to do that. But again, thank you for your time. I appreciate this. Send us an email if you have questions of, hey, here's a report I'm trying to do, or here's a calculation I'm trying to seek. Some of you are looking for reports that you're trying to merge together. Again, I would, based on what I typically hear with the, trying to merge reports, typically we already have a report that does that at a high level, is what I'll say. So like that project budget analysis would probably be a good starting point. If you're trying to cram all this detail into one report, you're overloading the one report anyway. So we would suggest the project budget analysis type of report in that respect. But I will leave it at that. I definitely appreciate everyone's feedback here. I will definitely pass along the feedback about doing a calculated group report webinar. And I hope you all have a great day. All right, well, thank you very much for joining. Take care.